I think we can move to our next talk. Now that there has been a ground created for binocular diplopia, let's go and see the actual causes that we get. Starting with actually the paralysis, paretic, that is the third, fourth, and the sixth nerve paresis. We have Dr. Swati Fuljale, who will be talking on managing the third nerve palsies. She's the Associate Professor of Ophthalmology at the RP Center, AIIMS, specialist in strabismus, neuro-ophthalmology, and glaucoma. She's also the managing editor of the INOS Times, which you must be getting the EE Times by the Indian Neuro-Ophthalmology Society, and a very good friend. Over to you, Swati.
Am I audible? And is my screen?
Yes, we can hear you, Swati. Yeah, we can see your slides also.
Yeah, thank you, Jyoti. I would like to thank Team ARC and especially Chairman Dr. Chitra for providing me this opportunity. And I would like to be, I'll try to be as brief as possible. So to begin with management of third nerve palsy, it's important to first classify third nerve, whether it's a congenital third nerve or an acquired third nerve, whether it's pupil involving third nerve or pupil sparing third nerve, whether it's a complete third nerve or partial third nerve palsy, because most of the time our differentials and our investigations are tailored according to the type of pathology that we see. So coming to the etiology of third nerve palsy in adults, in young adults, it is mainly because of compression. It could be because of aneurysm or any neoplasm, any mass lesion for that matter. In older age group, for example, more than 40 or 50 years of age, it is mainly vascular ischemic, what we call as ischemic nerve palsy. There can be associated risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, or any inflammatory lesions. In children, it is usually congenital, and trauma is one cause which is present all across the ages. Irrespective of the age, trauma is the most common cause for this nerve palsy. So as we all aware of the clinical features of third nerve palsy, it presents as a divergent squint. This is true for the complete third nerve palsy, where there is a complete complete fascicle of third nerve is involved. That there is a divergent squint, the eye is downwards, and only movement that is possible is the lateral movement. The pupil, if pupil is involved, is fixed and dilated, and there is anisocoria. Ptosis is unilateral if it's a fascicular involvement, and third nerve palsy at times could be part of various syndrome. But the clinical features of third nerve depend on the location where it gets involved. So to begin with, we have here the nuclear lesions. So there are many causes of nuclear third nerve palsy, ranging from infarction, infections, inflammation, compression, hemorrhage, and sometimes demyelination as well. So it's important to know the basic anatomy of third nerve nucleus. It's a very intergrowing nucleus in itself. It's not a nucleus, a nuclei which has multiple subnucleus and resides. It's located at the midbrain at the level of superior complex and spreads across the vertical meridian. So as it is visible in this particular diagram, you have the pupil Edinger-Westphal nucleus located dorsally and rostally, while you have unpaired caudate nucleus, which is located caudally. Then you have all other paired nucleus for each of the recti muscle. So if the complete nucleus is involved, you will have bilateral ptosis because there is one single nucleus for both the LPS. You will have pupillary involvement in both the eyes and ipsilateral third nerve palsy. There can be sometimes sparing of LPS if the lesion is involving the rostral area where the pupil involvement would be more prominent, and if the lesion involves the caudal area, then pupil would be spared. So depending on the lesion, depending on the location of the lesion, we may have either pupillary sparing or bilateral sources. But one thing that needs to be remembered when you want to differentiate a nuclear lesion from the infranuclear lesion is ptosis, if present, will always be bilateral. And pupillary involvement, if present, will always be bilateral. So these are the important features that will differentiate the nuclear from infranuclear lesions of third nerve palsy. And another thing that I think is important in third nerve is that the superior rectus is the only muscle that gets, contralateral innervation. So you may have contralateral superior rectus palsy also in these cases. So after the nerve exits through its nucleus, it travels ventrally through midbrain at the level of tegmentum, where it is very closely associated with very important structures like red nucleus, cerebral peduncles, and cerebellar peduncles. And that is the reason why it presents with various types of syndrome. When the lesion is at this level, at the level of tegmentum or at the level of red nucleus, you may not have isolated third nerve palsies. You may have third nerve palsy in association with various syndrome like Weber syndrome, where you have contralateral hemiparesis, Benedict syndrome, where you have extrapyramidal syndrome or extrapyramidal symptoms if the red nucleus is involved, Naegeli syndrome, where you have ipsilateral ataxia because the cerebellar peduncle is involved in this case. So it's important that you can localize the lesion in third nerve if you have this kind of coexisting syndrome. Now, after that, it travels in subarachnoid space where it is related to all kinds of arteries, and that's why it is one of the most common common nerve to get affected by various kind of aneurysms. Particularly, posterior communicating artery aneurysm is the most common type of aneurysm which affects third nerve. Then you have superior cerebral artery aneurysm, posterior cerebral artery aneurysm. Other causes at this region could be ischemia, neoplasm, and of course trauma. So a word about pupillary involvement, and it's important for residents to know that pupillary involvement is seen more in compressive lesions. Why? Because these fibers are located more dorsally and more superficially. So whenever there is a compression, whenever there is an external compression, these are the fibers that will get compressed. While if there is an ischemia, so the vessel is inside the substance of the nerve. So whenever there is ischemia, the substance of the nerve is first to get affected, while the pupillary fibers are relatively spared. So in ischemic lesions, it may not get so frequently involved, but it's not a sacrosanct thing. We have known that even ischemic lesions can have anisocoria. Around 20% of ischemic lesions can present with pupillary involving third nerve palsy. So this particular case is just to show anisocoria with the left third nerve palsy. And sometimes if there is aneurysm, you will have acute neurological dysfunction, meningismus, and early pupillary involvement may be sign of a ruptured aneurysm. Then this is just to show how an ischemic third nerve palsy will present, as in this case, the right third nerve palsy is there. There's a complete third nerve palsy, medial movement and elevation, depression, everything is affected, but the pupil are still spared. So the common causes are the vascular risk factors that may be there in such cases. Then at the cavernous sinus, it enters the cavernous sinus, lateral to the post-clinoid process, where it is in relation to various other cranial nerves. And whenever there is any lesion at this particular area, you may not have an isolated third nerve palsy. There may be other cranial nerve involvement, particularly fourth nerve involvement or fifth nerve involvement. So please don't forget to check for other extraocular movements if you have third nerve palsy in this area. And also please don't forget to check for corneal sensation, which is a very, very important sign, a localizing sign where the lesion could be. The causes could be again thrombosis, neoplasm, inflammation, embolism, microvascular occlusion, or sometimes AV fistulas as well. So at this stage, at the location of cavernous sinus, third nerve is particularly vulnerable to injuries at its entry, and trauma has to be severe enough to cause skull fracture and other problem. If it is not severe enough to cause, if it is minor, what I'm trying to say, if it is a minor trauma, a trivial trauma, then probably you may have to explore the other causes of third nerve in such cases. Not only trauma and not only the ischemia, as I said, compression in this case, in this area is also common, and pituitary adenoma is one of the common cause of compression at the area, at the location of cavernous sinus. Then it enters the superior orbital fissure, where it gets divided into two divisions: the superior division, which supplies to LPS and superior rectus, and the inferior division, which supplies to inferior rectus, inferior oblique, medial rectus, and pupil. Even though it has been seen that this is the most common area for the division of the third nerve, but division can be seen as early as at the location of the subarachnoid space as well. So even that can be possible. So this is just to show a case of a third nerve palsy where the inferior division is involved, and you can see that the elevation is well spared. Sometimes third nerve palsies can present as isolated muscle palsies like superior rectus, inferior rectus, and particularly medial rectus. So you have to be very careful about isolated medial rectus palsy, for which the most common differential is internuclear ophthalmoplegia. I'm sure it would be spoken about in subsequent talk by Dr. Subramaniam. So I'm not going to get into detail of it. I'm just trying to show few cases where you have the right eye, where you have this orbital fracture and the loss of medial rectus, where you have isolated medial rectus palsy. Then even neurocystic sarcosis can present as isolated medial rectus palsy, or for that matter, any extraocular muscle palsy. And it can present as both paralytic as well as restrictive squint. So we have to be aware of this particular condition. And if you have an isolated involvement, please look into the orbit rather than looking into the brain. And how to go for evaluation: take a proper history. There can be no substitute for a proper history and proper examination. So ask about trauma, pain, other systemic associations. As I discussed, there are various signs and symptoms of third nerve palsies, and do a complete neurological examination to know the associated neurological syndrome. Then don't forget to look for aberrant regeneration. It is very, very important, particularly the aberrant regeneration of lid in relation with down gaze or adduction, and aberrant regeneration of pupil in relation to adduction. Now, sometimes aberrant regeneration, otherwise aberrant regeneration is most commonly seen with trauma. But if you have a history of trivial trauma or no trauma at all, please explore for the other causes, and imaging may be needed in such cases. So coming to the how you approach this case of third nerve palsy, if you have pupil involved, imaging is the first step that you need to do, irrespective of the age or irrespective of the cause. But if pupil is spared, then again please look for whether it's a complete third nerve palsy. If it's a complete third nerve palsy and there is history of risk factors, you may get away doing follow-up and neuroimaging if no improvement is seen on follow-up. But if there is a partial third nerve palsy, so it may be still be an evolving third nerve palsy, and pupil may get involved at later stages. So be careful. Either you follow them up very, very closely so that you know when pupillary fibers are getting involved, or you do an imaging to know if there is any compressive lesion or not. So role of imaging is essentially to rule out any mass lesion in form of aneurysm, an aneurysm or tumor. Indication include, as I said, if the patient is young, pupil is involved, we will have to do neuroimaging, and particularly MRI. Please remember this, that the MRI is investigation of choice for these cases. If the patient is more than 40 years of age with pupil involved, you may still have to go to do neuroimaging. If there is an history of aberrant regeneration with no or history of trauma or very trivial history of trauma, please explore for the other causes. Then this is just to show.
Swati, can you conclude? It's more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's my last slide. So just to show how third nerve in our paper, we have shown that 90% of traumatic third nerve palsies have pupillary involvement, but around 36% of ischemic third nerve palsies also had pupillary involvement, and the recovery rate is very, very high in ischemic group, which is a known thing. Why I'm trying to say that ischemic group or the inflammatory group can improve, so there is no need to rush into the surgery. You can wait very well for the surgery till at least for 6 months, and these are the options for the surgical treatment of the third nerve palsies. With that, I conclude. Thank you.
Very much, Doctor. That was
Thank you, Dr. Swati.
And I, for one, really enjoyed hearing you, and it was like a revision and getting updated. A question, actually, this question is sort of a repetition of what you've already said, but maybe you could answer it a bit differently if you can. How do you manage a pupil sparing partial third nerve palsy in a 68-year-old diabetic? Would your answer differ if the patient were a 34-year-old?
Definitely, there would be a difference. If it's a 68-year-old and has a risk factor in form of diabetes, I would very closely follow up, because it's still a partial third nerve palsy. So you don't know when the pupil would get involved. So it's better to follow them very closely, maybe 2 weekly or so. and see if the pupil is getting involved or not. If the moment you have pupillary involvement, probably you may have to go to neuroimaging. Vis-a-vis, if you have a 30-year or a 38-year-old without any risk factor, you straight away have to go for neuroimaging.
I think Rashmin had a point to say. You have to unmute, Rashmin.
So the only difference, Swati has covered it, only difference is that when you say partial, do you mean that pupil is not involved, or do you mean that all extraocular muscles are not involved? Because please remember, the rule of pupil applies only to the total third nerve palsy. If it's a partial third nerve palsy where let's say only elevation is deficient or adduction is deficient, then irrespective of whether pupil is involved or not involved, it is prudent to go ahead and do neuroimaging, because as I said, rule of pupil involves to complete third nerve palsy and pupil spared.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Rashmi.
Yeah, Dr. Randhir, you want to say something?
Yeah, ma'am, this is basically apart from postgraduate teaching, but I think neuroimaging should be liberally done in any, this policies basically nowadays in the era of so much medical legal this thing.
I think Dr. Sujata wants to make a point. You can unmute.
See, for postgraduates, when you're looking for aberrant regeneration, remember, when you're looking down, don't lift up the pupils with your finger, lift up the upper lid with your fingers. You might totally miss an aberrant regeneration if you examine like that. Something like if you are doing this to look at the inferior gaze, then you will miss the aberrant regeneration. That is point number 1 for PGs. Point number 2 for postgraduates, the imaging of choice will be MRI with the MRA in a third nerve palsy answer. Okay, so MRA is to look for the aneurysm, which is an important cause of third nerve palsy. These are the 2 points I wanted to make.
When would you do a CT angio?
Or MRA or a CTA. Usually we will, yeah, either of the two.